The old house on Elm Street always smelled like lavender and baked apple pie. For me, it was the smell of weakness, a fragrance of a life too simple, and a kindness I couldn't afford. My grandparents, Martha and George, saw it as their legacy, a monument to their 50 years of marriage and hard work. I saw it as a gilded cage, and more importantly, a gold mine waiting to be claimed. They gave me the spare keys on a Sunday afternoon, sunlight streaming through the kitchen window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. "Just in case," Grandpa George said, his voice a little shaky with age and a tenderness that felt alien to me. "You never know when you might need to check on things. Maybe water the plants if we're out of town." Grandma Martha nodded, her eyes full of a hopeful, trusting light that I found almost sickening. I took the keys, a cold piece of brass in my palm, and promised I would. I smiled, nodded, and hugged them, playing the part of the dutiful granddaughter. But my mind was already racing, calculating. I had no intention of just checking on things. My life was a mess of credit card debt and a dead-end job. My social media feed was a constant parade of my friends posting pictures of their new cars, exotic vacations, and lavish weddings. I was tired of being the one left behind, the one who couldn't keep up. The house was the answer to all my problems. It was prime real estate in a quiet, affluent neighborhood in Boston. A real estate agent I met at a coffee shop, a woman with a shark's smile, told me it was worth a fortune. All I had to do was get the paperwork in order, forge a few signatures, and find a buyer. They were old, they were forgetful. They wouldn't even notice until it was too late. The thought almost sent a pang of guilt through me, but it was quickly buried under the weight of my ambition. This wasn't about them. It was about me and my future. This was my chance to finally get what I deserved. I need your help to make this story a success. Please like this video and subscribe to the channel to not miss the next chapters of this incredible story. The first step was the hardest and the most uncomfortable: getting the appraisal done without arousing their suspicion. The house was their sanctuary, and any stranger in it felt like a violation. I carefully crafted my lie, telling them I wanted to get the house's value assessed for their insurance, just to make sure they were properly covered for a worst-case scenario. "You know, for peace of mind," I said, trying to sound as earnest as possible. Grandpa George, always the pragmatist, thought it was an excellent idea. He meticulously brought out his old filing cabinet and showed me the original deed and the last appraisal from decades ago. Grandma Martha, a little more sentimental, was hesitant. "Why, dear? Nothing's going to happen to our home," she said, her frail hand resting on my arm as she looked around at the living room, her eyes lingering on the photographs of a life well lived. "It's just a precaution, Grandma," I reassured her, forcing a smile that felt brittle. "Just a bit of peace of mind." She eventually agreed, and I scheduled the appraiser, a meticulous man named David, for the following week. The day of the appraisal, I made sure my grandparents were out of the house. I had convinced them to go to a doctor's appointment I'd scheduled for them, a long drive across town and back. It was a cruel use of their trust. David walked through the house with a notebook and a serious expression, his presence feeling like an invasive inspection of a sacred space. He meticulously measured rooms, noted the vintage fixtures, and praised the well-maintained structure. He was impressed by the location and the solid foundation, but pointed out the need for some updates to modernize it. He then gave me a number, a staggering amount that was more than I had ever dared to dream. The figures swam in my head, a euphoric haze. It was happening. It was really happening. The old house wasn't just a place of memories anymore. It was a ticket to freedom. As I listened to David talk about the market, I felt a thrill I hadn't felt in years. It was the thrill of having control, of finally being in charge of my own destiny. The number he quoted was my escape route, my passport to a life of ease and luxury. My next move was to get the legal framework in place. I had a friend, a guy named Leo, who worked at a small, rather disreputable law firm downtown. He was a little shady, with a perpetual 5 o'clock shadow and a cynical glint in his eye, but he was good with paperwork and had an easygoing attitude about what was right and wrong. I told him I needed help with a family matter, a quick and discreet transfer of a property. He didn't ask too many questions. I brought him a handful of documents I had managed to find in my grandparents' filing cabinet, including old deeds, tax records, and a few outdated wills. He glanced at them, then looked at me with a knowing smirk, as if this was all a game. "So, are we doing this legit, or are we having some fun?" he asked, tapping a pen on the desk. "Just get it done, Leo," I said, my voice sharp, discreet and fast. The process was smoother than I had anticipated, sickeningly so. Leo knew how to navigate the system, where to find the right forms, and how to make the signatures look authentic. He even had a stamp made that mimicked the official notary seal. He worked with a cold efficiency that mirrored my own. I watched as he expertly traced my grandfather's shaky signature, his hand steady and precise. The whole thing felt like a grim game of Monopoly, but with real, life-altering consequences. As I sat there, my heart pounded a frantic rhythm against my ribs. What if they found out? What if I went to jail? The fear was a cold knot of anxiety that tightened in my stomach. But then, I would close my eyes and picture the money, the new life. I pictured myself on a beach in the Bahamas, a cold drink in my hand, with no worries in the world. The image was a powerful motivator, drowning out the last remnants of my conscience. This wasn't just paper, it was my new reality, and the ends, I told myself, justified the means. The day the real estate listing went live, I couldn't stop checking my phone. The real estate agent, Robert, had hired a professional photographer, and the results were stunning. The pictures looked beautiful. The old hardwood floors gleamed with a fresh polish I'd hired a cleaner to apply, and the sunlight streamed through the large bay windows, making the place look warm and inviting, full of a borrowed happiness. Robert's description talked about timeless charm and unparalleled location, all the usual jargon. I showed my grandparents the pictures, pretending it was a home I was thinking of buying for myself. I watched their faces as they scrolled through the digital album on my tablet. They looked at the photos with a mix of nostalgia and pride, a wistful smile on my grandmother's face. "It looks just like our home," my grandmother said, her eyes misty. "It reminds me of the day we first moved in. George carried me over the threshold." My heart pounded in my chest, a fierce, panicked drumbeat. They were so close to the truth, yet so far. The feeling was intoxicating, a dangerous mix of triumph and terror. The first offer came in a week later, then another, and another. Robert was ecstatic. The offers were all above the asking price. A bidding war for the house my grandparents had poured their lives into. I felt a surge of power, a rush of cold exhilaration. I was in control. I was going to be rich. The guilt was a distant whisper, easily ignored by the roar of my success. The offers were a tangible validation of my scheme, proof that my risk was paying off. It felt like I was winning a game no one else even knew was being played, and the prize was everything I had ever wanted. Remember to subscribe to the channel for the next thrilling chapters of this story. Your support helps me bring these narratives to life. As the offers came in, I started avoiding my grandparents' calls. Every time the phone rang, I imagined them asking about the house, about some small detail I might have overlooked, or a memory that a stranger would soon replace. I knew they would eventually find out. It was a ticking time bomb, and I was holding my breath, waiting for the inevitable explosion. I told them I was busy with a new job, working long hours, which wasn't entirely a lie. I was busy, just not in a way they would approve of. The real estate agent, Robert, kept pushing for me to accept an offer. He said a young couple, expecting their first child, had made a cash offer with no contingencies. They loved the house and wanted to move in as soon as possible. The thought of a new young family taking over the home felt almost poetic. a clean slate for me, a new beginning for them. One afternoon, my grandmother called, her voice full of concern, the kind of motherly worry that used to make me roll my eyes. "Honey, we haven't seen you in a while. Are you all right? We're worried about you." The guilt was a physical weight on my shoulders. I felt my hands trembling as I held the phone. "I'm fine, Grandma, just tired. I'm working on a big project. I promise I'll come over soon." The lie tasted like ash, and I felt a brief pang of shame. I knew I wouldn't go over. Not until the deal was done and the money was in my bank account. I had to see this through, no matter what. The pressure was building, and I felt like I was losing control, but there was no turning back now. The thought of losing this chance, this escape route, was far more terrifying than the prospect of their disappointment. The final closing date was set, a Friday afternoon in a sterile modern law office. The air was cool and smelled of polished wood and expensive coffee. I met with Robert and the buyers, a young couple named Sarah and Tom. They were so excited, so full of plans for the house. Sarah was glowing, her hand often resting on her slightly rounded stomach as she talked about painting the nursery a soft shade of yellow and planting a vegetable garden in the backyard. Tom, a kind-eyed man with a genuine smile, showed me pictures of their golden retriever, who he said would love the big yard. They were the kind of people my grandparents would have loved, the kind of family who would have filled the house with laughter and love. They were kind, genuine, and completely unaware of the deceit behind the sale. As I sat there, signing the papers, I could almost hear my grandmother's voice, her gentle laughter echoing in the back of my mind. The old house, the one filled with so many memories, of Christmas mornings by the fireplace, of family dinners in the dining room, of summer afternoons on the porch swing, was no longer theirs. It was no longer mine. It was a piece of property, a transaction, a sum of money represented by a number on a screen. The finality of the act hit me hard, like a physical blow. A small, desperate part of me wanted to stop, to tear up the papers and run, but my hand kept moving, signing my name with a flourish on each line. The documents were a cold, legal testament to my greed, to my selfishness, to the person I had become. The pen felt heavier with each signature, each one a nail in the coffin of my relationship with my grandparents and with my own soul. The money hit my bank account a few days later. The number on the screen was massive, a string of digits that promised a life I had only dreamed of. I felt a fleeting moment of pure exhilaration, a rush of adrenaline that made my head spin. I was rich. I was free. I bought a new car, a sleek black sedan that smelled of leather and success, and booked a first-class flight to a tropical island I'd only ever seen in magazines. I ordered an expensive designer handbag online, the kind that cost more than a month's rent. I was living the life I had always wanted, or so I told myself. But the feeling of triumph was short-lived. The money didn't bring me the peace I expected. Instead, it brought a gnawing emptiness, a deep, hollow ache that no shopping spree could fill. I tried to call my grandparents, to tell them I was doing well, to try and mend the bridge I had burned. But they didn't answer. I left a dozen voicemails, each one more desperate and rambling than the last. I drove to their house, my new car feeling strange and out of place on the familiar, quiet street. The key they had given me didn't work. The lock had been changed. A new family lived there. They were planting flowers in the front yard, their young child running around with a golden retriever, the very dog Tom had shown me pictures of. I saw my grandmother's favorite rose bush, trimmed and healthy, and felt a wave of nausea. I had not only betrayed them, but I had erased their very existence from a place that was once their sanctuary. My world was shrinking, and I was trapped in it, surrounded by new things, but haunted by old memories. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for the final chapters. The end of this story is closer than you think. The final devastating blow came in the form of a phone call. My grandfather's number popped up on my screen, and I hesitated for a moment. my thumb hovering over the answer button. When I finally took the call, his voice was tight with a cold, righteous anger I had never heard before. "We know what you did," he said, the words cutting through me like a knife. There was no preamble, no greeting. "We got a letter from the bank, a courtesy notice about the sale. We thought it was a mistake. We thought there was a mix-up." His voice broke, the anger giving way to a profound sadness. "How could you, honey? We trusted you. We gave you everything." I tried to speak, to apologize, to explain, but the words wouldn't come. My throat was a desert. "We even believed your lie about the insurance. We went out of our way to help you." I could hear my grandmother in the background, her sobs ragged and broken. The sound was unbearable. It was the sound of a family breaking apart, of a love I had taken for granted, now shattered into a million pieces. I had always thought of myself as clever, as strong, as someone who could outsmart the system and win. But in that moment, as I listened to the sound of their grief, I felt nothing but a deep, profound weakness. The new car, the designer bag, the money. None of it mattered. It was all meaningless. It felt like playing a game with fake money, while I had traded a priceless treasure. I had won the game, but I had lost everything that was worth winning. I hung up the phone, unable to bear the weight of their sorrow. The silence that followed was deafening, filled only with the sound of my own ragged breaths. My success was a hollow victory, and the real price had just been revealed. The money became a curse, and my new life quickly unraveled. My so-called friends disappeared as quickly as the money did. When I started spending less, their calls became sporadic. Their texts went unanswered. When I needed a ride, they were too busy or out of town. I was alone. The expensive clothes and fancy dinners couldn't fill the void in my heart. The guilt was a constant companion, a heavy, suffocating weight that sat on my chest, making it hard to breathe. I tried to reconnect with my grandparents, leaving letters at their old address that were returned unopened, calling their old friends to find out where they had moved. I eventually found out they had moved to a small apartment, downsizing after losing their home. My grandmother had fallen ill, and the stress of the situation had only made it worse. My actions had tangible, physical consequences on the people I claimed to love. My new life, the one I had worked so hard to build, was falling apart at the seams. I had no one to talk to, no one to lean on. I had pushed everyone away, and now I was paying the price. The loneliness was a cold, sharp ache, a constant reminder of my choices. The lavish apartment I had rented felt like a prison. The irony wasn't lost on me. I had everything I wanted, and I had nothing at all. I was trapped in a gilded cage of my own making, surrounded by all the things I thought would bring me happiness, but feeling more miserable and isolated than ever before. The wealth I had coveted was a hollow substitute for the love and connection I had so carelessly thrown away. I found their new address through a kind neighbor who still remembered me, a woman who looked at me with a mix of pity and sorrow. I drove to a small, modest apartment building on the outskirts of Boston, a stark contrast to the sprawling house on Elm Street. I stood outside their door for what felt like an eternity. The spare key they had given me, a useless piece of metal, a phantom weight in my hand. I didn't know what to say. "I'm sorry," felt too small, too insignificant to cover the depth of my betrayal. I finally worked up the courage to knock, my knuckles trembling against the worn wood. My grandfather opened the door. His face was lined with new wrinkles, his hair was whiter, and his eyes held a profound sadness that I couldn't bear to look at. My grandmother was sitting in a chair by the window, a thin blanket over her lap. She looked frail, a shadow of the woman who used to bake apple pies. I broke down, the sobs coming from deep within my chest. "I'm so sorry," I managed to say between gasps for air. "I messed up. I was so greedy. I'm so sorry." My grandfather looked at me for a long moment, his face unreadable, his heart likely torn between a father's love and a man's betrayal. He slowly opened his arms, and I fell into his embrace, a broken mess. He held me tight. "You're our granddaughter," he said, his voice softer now, but still full of pain. "We'll never stop loving you, but it's going to take a very long time for us to trust you again." I knew it was true. The road to forgiveness was a long one, not a quick, painless path. The money was gone, my new life a distant memory. I had lost everything, but in their forgiveness, I had a chance to rebuild. Not my wealth, but my life. One painful step at a time. The road to redemption was just beginning, and this time, I would not walk it alone. This is the end of the story. If you enjoyed this journey and want to see more stories like this, please subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Your support means everything,